switch to presentation view, I can't see the clock on the screen. So if you see me looking at my phone, it's so that I know what time it is, because there's no clock in here either. So that's why I look at my phone. For it. And also, if you decide to duck out after a lecture and not attend lab, that's an unexcused absence. Okay, so if you have to leave, like, talk to me. You know, if you've got some emergency situation at home, like, let me know. Just talk to me if you, like, right? I mean, you don't have to tell me what you don't want to tell me, but if I know, you know, oh, they're not just ditching out because they don't want to be here, they're ditching out because they have an emergency at home, then I'm not going to count you for an unexcused absence, okay? So that's the only reason why I worry about that stuff. All right, so chapter 1. So it's really important to understand anatomy so that we can understand physiology. Anatomy is going to be what we're doing in lab. Now we will be learning some structures here, but predominantly lab is going to be the anatomy portion of this course. When we start talking about how the different parts of the body work together, that's when we're going to be talking about physiology. So anatomy deals with the structures of the body. Physiology is how these structures work together. We can also do different types of physiological experiments as well to try to help us understand how the things in the body work together. So these are how these two things work together. When we're in lab, like I said, it's all going to be like point and identify. When we get into lecture, we can have some lab style questions, but it's going to be a little bit more thought in there. Okay. And there are never any diagrams. I don't put diagrams on the exams. That's all lab stuff. So if I say an exam, I'm talking about lecture. If I say a practical, I'm talking about lab. Okay. So gross anatomy is macroscopic anatomy. It's what you can see with your eyes. Okay, so anything that you can look at with your eyes, that's going to be gross anatomy. So when we go into the microscope, that's going to be microscopic anatomy. Okay. So we're going to be studying not a lot of cytology, which is cell. So anytime you see that word cyte, C-Y-T, C-Y-T-E, that stands for cell.
You said it stands for cell?
Cell, C-E-L-L.
Mm-hmm.
So histology is going to be the study of tissues. So we see things at a macroscopic level, we see things at a microscopic level, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about developmental anatomy and within the embryo. And the times we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about it when we talk about the different ways that bones form. And then we're also going to talk about it when we talk about brain development in the embryo as well. So there's a little bit of developmental anatomy in here, and we'll touch on that with bone development and development of the brain. The way that our bodies are organized, if we go from the smallest structures to the largest structures, and this figure or a similar figure is in your book. One thing I'll point out down here, I have the page numbers, and the page numbers correspond with the book that I showed y'all. So if you have a different version, the page numbers may not line up. But if you ever miss something, that I say, I recommend that you just write that page number down so you can go back and reference it. So the smallest things are atoms. These atoms come together and form molecules. And then those molecules come together and they make different types of proteins and stuff that then formulate the organelles. And organelles are little subcellular parts that we're going to find in a cell. So you have the organelle, and those organelles are inside a cell. And then those cells come together, and they're gonna form a tissue. Okay, so it can either be muscle tissue. We have 3 different types of muscle tissue. So there's smooth, skeletal, and cardiac. So it'll form a type of tissue. And then those tissues come together and form an organ. So smooth muscle is found in our hollow organs. So the blood vessel is one type of hollow organ. Smooth muscle, you'll also find it around your esophagus, your stomach. So any sort of hollow organ you can find smooth muscle, except the heart is going to be cardiac. Then these organs are going to come together and form an organ system. So when you think about cardiovascular, that's going to be your heart and your blood vessels. Respiratory, you have your lungs and your trachea, different things like that. You're going to form the organ system level. And then all of those different organ systems come together and form the organism. It's going to be the largest way that this stuff is grouped together. Okay? So just know this stuff in the order of smallest to largest and how it fits together. Don't worry about writing this down. This is just kind of an elaboration on that last slide. So different things, I started the subatomic particles. So when we talk about chemistry, we're going to talk about neutrons, protons, and electrons. And then atoms, that's what you see on the table of the periodic table of elements. Hydrogen, lithium, magnesium, calcium, sodium, and then a molecule. Water is H2O, 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. Salt, table salt, sodium chloride, sodium and chloride together. And these things come together and they create the macromolecule, which is a protein. And then, as I said a moment ago, those molecules forming the macromolecule, they're then going to come together and form the organelles. and those organelles come together and form a cell. So we're going to talk about those organelles when we get to chapter 3, I think it is where we talk about the cell. Who can tell me what mitochondria are? Powerhouse of the cell, yes. Mitochondria, most people remember mitochondria. Powerhouse of the cell, that's where all our ATP comes from. What's ATP?
Energy.
Energy. ATP is energy. We love ATP, especially if you're an energetic person. And then we've got different types of cells. Muscle cells are obviously going to make up any type of muscles. Nerve cells, that's going to be in your nervous system. They do interact with your muscular system. Tissues are made up of multiple cells coming together and creating some sort of organ. And then you would see organ system, organism. So just kind of breaking it down a little bit for you. And then we have all these different organ systems. In this class, we're going to cover, so we're going to start off, right, introductory stuff. Chapter 2 is chemistry. We're going to talk about the cell and different organelles inside the cell. And then the first big organ system we're going to hit is the skeletal system. Okay. After the skeletal system, we'll talk about the integumentary system, and then we'll move on to the muscular system, and then the nervous system. All the other systems are going to be covered in A and P2. So what is the function of these different organ systems? We're going to talk about the function of different organs quite a bit. What's the function of the skeletal system? What's the function of the integumentary system? We'll be talking about this. So the integument is your skin plus this layer below your skin called the hypodermis. So your skin is not including the hypodermis. But if you talk about the integument, then you will be including the hypodermis in there. So that helps create boundaries between you and the external environment. Your skin, your integument, is your first line of defense against getting sick. You'll hear me say foreign invaders a lot, whether it be a parasite or a virus. Your skin is your first line of defense. And so it gives you that boundary. Another way that your skin maintains boundaries, it keeps the water inside your body. Okay? So it provides a boundary between keeping stuff in your body and not letting it leak out. The muscular system is involved in movement. That's generally pretty easy for people to figure out. The nervous system, our ability to respond to things. Okay? You touch a hot stove, pull it away. That's your nervous system working. Okay? So the nervous system allows us to respond to external stimuli. The nervous system also helps you respond to internal stimuli. You eat something and your stomach starts churning. Okay? You don't tell your stomach to start churning, but that's something that's happening inside you. Our digestive organ system, that's going to obviously be digesting things, pulling nutrients out. Digestive and urinary systems are involved in excreting wastes. Okay, when we talked about the digestive system with respect to excreting waste, that's going to be the colon. Then reproduction happens with the reproductive system. And growth occurs at the cellular level. Right? We all start off as a fertilized egg. The sperm and the egg come together and make an embryo, a single-celled embryo. None of y'all in this room are a single cell anymore, right? So, as soon as that egg is fertilized, that one cell becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16. That is how you grow, is by the addition of cells. That's how we get bigger. This right here is the cell cycle, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the cell in chapter 3. Okay, metabolism. Metabolism is happening in multiple organ systems. It's not just in your digestive system. A lot of times when we think of metabolism, we associate that with weight. You know, somebody has a high metabolism, they're skinny. It's not just happening in your digestive, it's happening at the cellular level, it's happening in your respiratory system. How do you think that oxygen gets into your bloodstream? Okay. And your lungs also put nutrients into your bloodstream through your lungs. And then cardiovascular, we also have metabolism in there. So metabolism is a physiological event, right? We have multiple anatomical structures working together to create this physiological event, which supports life. We have a lot of different chemical reactions happening in our body. For example, metabolism and anabolism. Catabolism is when stuff gets broken down, right? So when you eat a burger, that burger gets broken down into carbs from the bun, into protein from the meat, all that stuff. Then anabolism is going to be taking molecules and bringing them back together. So catabolism and anabolism are both parts of metabolism. Breaking stuff down and then putting them back together in a different way that helps sustain life. And this is all done through various chemical reactions that are taking place in our body. Don't worry about writing this down. We do have some survival needs in our body. Actually, if you want to write down survival needs, I would just put down water, nutrients, oxygen, heat, and pressure. Water has a very unique property in that it's polar. So one side of the water molecule is positively charged and the other side of the water molecule is negatively charged. And this helps with breaking stuff down, okay? Because it has both that positive and negative charge. It helps break stuff apart. Nutrients, right? We're gonna be getting our food from whatever it is that we're consuming. Getting our nutrients from whatever food we're consuming. Typically we're gonna be breathing in oxygen, and then the waste that we're gonna release is carbon dioxide. And this is gonna help. Your respiratory system is also involved in helping absorb nutrients. As I said a second ago, you know, our nutrients are gonna get into our bloodstream, not just from our digestive organs, but also through our lungs. Heat is going to help with enzymatic reactions or metabolic reactions. A lot of times the enzymes in our body are going to help decrease the activation energy needed to have a reaction take place. And then pressure is important when it comes to breathing. Anybody in here scuba dive? Okay, so when you scuba dive, if you go down 33 feet, that's considered 1 atmosphere of pressure. And right now we're under 1 atmosphere of pressure. So you can imagine 33 feet versus however many miles to the ozone is a big difference. And so one thing about when people scuba dive that they have to be careful about, when I was little, we were in, I think it was Grand Cayman, and a snorkeler went down to his friend that was scuba diving, and he went down in 10 feet of water, and he took a breath off of his extra respirator and came back up without expelling the air, and it expanded and his lungs burst, right? So you have to be, right, pressure is important. It helps with us breathing, but if you're gonna be doing something like scuba diving, you need to be mindful that other things can happen. And then you've heard about an overload of nitrogen in the body causing the bend and things like that. So pressure is pretty important. And we don't really think about it walking around, but if you go and scuba dive and learn that stuff, it becomes a pretty important factor. So homeostasis is our body's way of staying in a happy equilibrium. If you're hot, you start sweating to cool down. If you're cold, your muscles start shivering to release heat and warm you up. So this is just one example of homeostasis in the everyday setting. If you've been out working in the yard or out working out, maybe you've gotten dehydrated and you need some water, right? Your brain knows that you need more water and it stimulates thirst. And so then you're like, oh, I'm thirsty, and you go and drink more water. If you get too hot, this can start denaturing enzymes in your body, which means that some of the metabolic processes that need to take place will not be taking place. And that can really hurt our bodies. Now you may be like, well, wait a minute, if we got the flu or something, our temperature rises. Yes, and that is a response to try to kill the virus. So your body has figured out that it's more advantageous to get hot and try to kill the virus and end up killing a few enzymes in the process than to let that virus just wreak havoc on your body and kill you. So homeostasis requires a lot of our metabolic energy. There's also extracellular fluid. When we talk about extracellular, that's going to mean outside of the cell. So it's this fluid that is just basically around in the body. You can kind of think of like blood as an extracellular fluid with respect to your red blood cells and white blood cells. And then inside the cells, we have intracellular fluid. Okay. So extra, outside, intra, inside. I mentioned being hot or cold. With respect to homeostasis, we detect some sort of sensation in our external environment. And that is detected by our receptors or sensors. And as we continue on through, you're going to hear me saying the word afferent, and it's not up here, but efferent a lot. And so our nervous system, the afferent system is bringing information in, and then the efferent is taking information out, which is going to result in some sort of muscular movement. And in between those two, we have the control center. So you put your hand on the hot stove, you feel the sensation of heat, and that is received by the receptors and goes up your nervous system or your afferent system to your spinal cord and maybe up to your brain. And that's the control center. Your spinal cord or your brain is going to be the control center, and it's going to process that information that's going on. And it's going to say, hey, that's hot, you need to pull your hand away. And then your efferent or your effectors are going to be your hand actually pulling away from the stove. That reaction that you get, that effect that happens when your spinal cord or brain has made a decision. There are two types of feedback. We have positive feedback and negative feedback. When I gave you all the example of being hot or cold, and so when you're hot, you sweat, or when you're cold, you shiver. That's an example of a negative feedback. So things are going to gradually return to normal. Positive feedback is going to be something extreme. So normally when I talk about positive feedback, what I say is it's got to push you over that hump. One example of positive feedback is childbirth, right? You got to get over that hump of getting that baby outside of you before you can return back to normal. Shivering is a lot easier to go back to being warm. Right? So when you think of negative feedback, you're just going back to normal as soon as possible. But when it's positive feedback, it says there, intensified. Kind of push over that hump. There's something really big happening, so it's like everything goes in to try to get this back to normal. It's not a slow process, or it's not an easy process. So the hot and cold, right, negative feedback. Go ahead and write down those examples of negative feedback. When you're hot, you sweat, and that causes you to cool down. When you're cold, your muscles shiver. Your muscles aren't just useful for movement, but then shivering also generates heat. So those are two examples of negative feedback. The two examples of positive feedback, I just told y'all childbirth is one of those, right? Gotta get the baby out, extreme situation. I guess maybe some people had an easy childbirth, so I don't think the first one's normally easy. I think after the first one. I haven't had any kids yet, so it's just hearsay for me. The other one that's positive feedback is if you cut yourself and you start bleeding. If you cut yourself and you start bleeding, and we're going to talk about tissue response, but one of the first things that happens is you have a bunch of mast cells that start releasing histamine, and that is going to cause inflammation, and that's going to attract all these white blood cells in, as well as platelets, right? So you're actively bleeding. We've just cut our integument, or our skin, and you have a chance of having bacteria, or maybe a parasite get in, but especially if you cut yourself with something like metal, or you might need a tetanus shot, right? That bacteria can get in you. So you want those white blood cells